August 10th, 1945. This week, American planes dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. I'm Indy Nidell. This is World War II. Last week, the materials for an atomic bomb were delivered to Tinian in the Marianas, but the ship delivering them, USS Indianapolis, was sunk by a Japanese torpedo days after delivery. US President Harry Truman made the decision to drop atomic bombs on Japan because the Japanese did not give an answer to the Allies' demand of unconditional surrender. There was active fighting in Burma and China, and the Potsdam Conference came to its end. And this week, on the morning of August 6, 1945, the plane Enola Gay drops the Little Boy atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The plane is from the 509th Composite Air Group of the 20th Air Force, piloted by Paul Tibbets. The plane is named after Tibbets' mother. The bomb's yield is close to 20,000 tons of TNT. 60% of the city is destroyed, and 80,000 people are killed, many of them instantly. The March firebombing of Tokyo was actually more deadly and destructive overall, but that this today could be caused by one single plane shows only too well the complete change in military and political thinking which has begun. Of course, many tens of thousands are injured as well. Of 90,000 buildings in the city, 62,000 are destroyed. Of 200 doctors, 180 are killed or badly wounded. Of 1,780 nurses, 150 are still able to tend to the injured, but of 55 hospitals and medical centers in the city, only 3 are usable after the bomb. The scale and nature of the destruction of human life at Hiroshima was eventually to alter the whole nature of how mankind looked at wars, power, diplomacy, and the relationship between states. In the days in which its reality was only slowly becoming apparent, it was the terrifying human aspects which each survivor could not shake out of his or her nightmares. We have a series called War Against Humanity on this channel, which covers things like attacks against civilians more than I do in these regular episodes. And we have an episode up this week that I suggest you watch for more about the events of the week. Personal recollections from those who were there and things like that. Let me backtrack here a minute. The night of August 5th, 7 groups of bombers set off to bomb mainland Japan. 30 planes dropped bombs on the inland sea, 65 bomb Saga, 102 drop incendiaries on Maebashi, 261 in the Nishinomiya Mikage area, 111 go to Ube, 6 to Imbari, and just 1 bomber goes to Hiroshima, though it has escorts. That last mission is Operation Centerboard, beginning at 2:45 a.m. when the B-29 Enola Gay takes off from Tinian in the Marianas. The plane carries a uranium-235 core bomb nicknamed Little Boy, which is dropped on Hiroshima at 8:15 a.m. Among the messages scrawled on the bomb is "Greetings to the Emperor from the men of the Indianapolis," which was sunk last week. Robert E. Lewis is the aircraft commander and the co-pilot. The bomb actually explodes 570 meters above the ground, and the blast has a core temperature of around 1,000,000 degrees Celsius. So 20,000 of those instant deaths are people being vaporized. People have pretty similar descriptions of the actual blast. First comes a tremendous, though brief, flash of blue-white light, much like a giant magnesium flare. There is intense heat and glare, then a huge pressure wave and the rumbling sound of the explosion. Interestingly enough, survivors relatively near the center of the blast do not clearly recollect this, but it is heard over 20 kilometers away. Then a gigantic white cloud shoots up into the sky, while near the ground is first a bluish haze and then a purple-brown smoke cloud. The following quotes are from the United States Strategic Bombing Survey. Such eyewitness accounts reveal the sequence of events. At the time of the explosion, energy was given off in the forms of light, heat, radiation, and pressure. The complete band of radiations from X and gamma rays through ultraviolet and light rays traveled with the speed of light. The shock wave created by the enormous pressures built up almost instantaneously at the point of explosion, but moved out more slowly, that is, about the speed of sound. The superheated gases constituting the original fireball expanded outward and upward at a slower rate. Okay, that's pretty dry, but there's more. The light and radiant heat rays accompanying the flash traveled in a straight line, and any opaque object, even a single leaf on a vine, shielded objects lying behind it. The duration of the flash was only a fraction of a second, but it was sufficiently intense to cause third-degree burns to exposed human skin up to a distance of a mile. Clothing ignited, telephone poles charred, thatch-roofed houses caught fire. Dark-colored surfaces of combustible material absorbed the heat and immediately charred or burst into flames. The heavy black clay tiles, which are an almost universal feature of the roofs of Japanese houses, bubbled at distances up to a mile. Tests of samples of this tile indicate that temperatures in excess of 1,800 Celsius must have been generated. In the immediate area of Ground Zero, the heat charred corpses beyond recognition. Okay, and what about the radiation? Penetrating rays such as gamma rays exposed X-ray films stored in the basement of a concrete hospital almost a mile from Ground Zero. Symptoms of their effect on human beings, who survived the other effects thereof, were generally delayed for 2 or 3 days. The bone marrow, and as a result the process of blood formation, were affected. The white corpuscle count went down, and the human processes of resisting infection were destroyed. Death generally followed shortly thereafter. As for radiation cases at greater distances, I can but imagine what the short and long-term damage caused to people by the bombs will be. Yep, bombs, plural. On the 9th, the plane Boxcar drops the Fat Man atomic bomb on Nagasaki. The pilot is Charles Sweeney. This is originally planned for the 11th, but predicted bad weather brings the date forward 2 days. Again, several hundred bombers set off on their various missions, and again, a second specially adapted B-29 takes off from Tinian. At 1:56, the plane takes off. At 11:02, the bomb is dropped. Nagasaki isn't the original target, actually. That is Kokura, but planners have stipulated that if Kokura has heavy cloud cover, Sweeney is to hit Nagasaki instead, which he does because Kokura is covered in an industrial haze this morning. Sweeney's orders are to only drop the bomb on a visible target. It is a less devastating attack than Hiroshima, even though it's a more advanced bomb. It kills around 40,000 people. The bombers for both of these attacks are part of the 509th Composite Group, a unit under Paul Tibbets whose sole mission is to drop the atomic bombs. It's such a secret mission that when Brigadier General Davis, commander of the 313th Bombardment Wing, to whom 509th Composite technically belongs, tries to visit their compound on Tinian, he is turned away at gunpoint. An aircraft that dropped the new bomb was required to fly at least 8 miles away from the point at which the device was set to detonate. It would have 40 seconds to complete the maneuver. That required a hard-banking 155-degree turn, during which the pilot would dive steeply to pick up speed. Tactical analysis of Japanese fighter defenses led Tibbets to conclude that they should remove most of the armaments from the planes and rely on speed and altitude to thwart interception. As this second bomb detonates, the Japanese Supreme War Council is actually meeting in Tokyo to discuss the Potsdam Declaration. They know the news about the Hiroshima bomb in Tokyo, of course, and they do meet the 7th, but some of them either don't believe it's an atomic bomb or believe that the Americans can only possibly have 1 or 2 of them. On the morning of the 7th, however, Japan's leading nuclear scientist flies to Hiroshima to check it out, and he knows at once, just circling the city, that only an atomic bomb could do such devastation. On the 8th, Japanese Prime Minister Suzuki tries to summon another meeting of the council, but several members say they cannot attend. So even 48 hours after the first bomb, no change of Japanese policy or position is even possible because they don't have quorum. They finally meet the 9th. The council is evenly divided as to accepting unconditional surrender. 3 are for it, and 3 are for continuing the war. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo is for surrender, as is Suzuki. Minister of War Kurashika Anami is adamant there be no surrender. He has this to say: "It is far too early to say the war is lost. That we will inflict serious losses on the enemy when he invades Japan is certain, and it is by no means impossible that we may be able to reverse the situation in our favor, pulling victory out of defeat. Furthermore, our army will not submit to demobilization. And since they know they are not permitted to surrender, since they know that a fighting man who surrenders is liable to extremely heavy punishment, there is really no alternative for us but to continue the war. I wonder what planet he's living on where Japan might actually win the war. Well, they seem to be at an impasse, but Togo and Suzuki have a secret meeting with Emperor Hirohito and convince him to call another meeting over which he presides. That meeting is just after midnight that night in his underground bomb shelter. First, he reads the Potsdam Declaration, which I did 2 weeks ago if you want to go back and know exactly what it says and how it says it. After that, Togo tells the gang that provided the emperor's position and the throne will still be respected, they must accept. For 2 hours, they argue back and forth, which Hirohito ends by saying, continuing the war can only result in the annihilation of the Japanese people and a prolongation of the suffering of all humanity. It seems obvious that the nation is no longer able to wage war, and its ability to defend its own shores is doubtful. He tells the council to bear the unbearable, and a formal acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration is sent to the Japanese ambassadors in Sweden and Switzerland early the 10th to send to the Allies. This is it. The Japanese government are ready to accept the terms enumerated in the joint declaration, which was issued at Potsdam on the 26th of July, 1945, by the heads of government of the United States, Great Britain, and China, and later subscribed to by the Soviet government with the understanding that the said declaration does not comprise any demand that prejudices the prerogatives of His Majesty as a sovereign ruler. This is the first time an emperor has directly intervened in the Imperial Council since 1895. All other times, he gives his sanction to something that's been agreed upon. That's early today, and U.S. President Harry Truman and his advisors, when they get this, discuss whether or not this emperor bit negates the acceptance of unconditional surrender. Secretary of State James Burns, and I'm not sure if I mentioned that he was appointed to the post early last month, but he was, puts together something that says, okay, from the moment of surrender then, the authority of the emperor and the Japanese government to rule the state shall be subject to the supreme commander of the Allied powers. Maybe that'll sort things out. Well, they start diplomatic exchanges, and Truman actually gives the orders to suspend the atomic bombings. Will they accept? I am pretty darn certain we'll find out next week. Also, Truman does not suspend conventional bombing of Japan in the meantime. Some of you may have noticed I just said about the declaration, later subscribed to by the Soviet government, right? Yeah, that happens. See, the Japanese get their final answer about whether the Soviets will mediate some sort of peace with the other allies. On the 8th, Togo asks Ambassador to Moscow Naotake Sato if he's gotten an answer, and he says he is to meet Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov at 5 p.m. that day. Molotov receives Sato and gives him a document to send to his government. It says that since Japan has rejected the demand by the US, China, and Britain for unconditional surrender, that the Japanese proposal for the Soviets to mediate in ending the war has lost all basis. And since Japan refuses to submit, the Allies have asked the Soviets to join the war to shorten it and reduce the body count. The Soviets have accepted and have joined the Potsdam Declaration, seeing this as the only way to bring peace and to free people from suffering. And so, from August 9th, the Soviet government declares itself to be at war with Japan. The Japanese have 1.2 million men in Manchuria and Korea in the Kwangtung Army, but it's a shell of what it used to be, with the best divisions having been stripped for use elsewhere. In fact, 26 of its 31 divisions have been formed since this year began. A lot of that from levies or local militia. There are no modern anti-tank weapons, barely any weapons at all over 75 millimeters. There are but 2 tank brigades, and 2 of their regiments were only formed days ago. The 3 Soviet fronts are collectively under Alexander Vasilevsky, and the names, like his, should be familiar to you. Rodion Malinovsky's Trans-Baikal Front attacks from Mongolia across the Gobi Desert. He has like half the total attack power and 6th Guards tank army. Kirill Meretskov's 1st Far Eastern Front attacks from the east, from the Soviet maritime region. Maxim Porkayev's Second Far Eastern Front attacks from the north towards Harbin. The three fronts have some 5,500 tanks and 3,900 planes total. The Soviets faced major challenges. The theater of operations was vast. Manchuria amounted to 1.5 million square miles, roughly the size of France and Germany together. Manchuria is a natural redoubt, with a central plain surrounded by a horseshoe-shaped series of barriers. The Soviets attacked during the rainy season and would face incessant rain and muddy terrain. Nor would the attackers have time for a methodical advance, as the Soviets accelerated their planning as the Japanese began to move towards surrender. Once begun, Stalin pushed Red Army forces to press their attacks and consolidate objectives before the possible arrival of U.S. forces. On the 9th, Malinovsky and Meretskov begin their offensives. They advance everywhere, achieving strategic and tactical surprise. The week ends before any major engagements begin, but it does not look good for the Japanese as the Soviet steamroller comes on, advancing nearly 200 kilometers in places already. I should point out that the Imperial Council gets word of the second atomic bomb before any detailed news about Soviet advances in Manchuria. Now, the Soviets agreed to join the war around now many months ago. But still, because of the sudden invasion, an emergency strategy had to be evolved rapidly by the State Department, where there was still a very strong China lobby which believed that the USA had an important role to play in a post-war China ruled by Chiang Kai-shek. Here were huge untapped markets for America's industrial strength, galvanized by its stupendous war efforts since Pearl Harbor. State Department officials had felt themselves snubbed by Roosevelt in his last months, and they were now obsessed with the need to checkmate Soviet plans for outward expansion, above all, to avoid Soviet predominance in Korean affairs through the establishment of a pro-Moscow government in Seoul. Today, the 10th, though, Ivan Chistyakov's Soviet 25th Army in Korea is occupying the north and making for Pyongyang. The Americans did not see this coming. And they don't have any troops closer to Korea than Okinawa, and those guys have just been through the ringer. What to do? Well, as quickly as possible, agree to the limits of occupation zones before disarming the Japanese garrisons in Korea. So Dean Rusk, currently a staff officer at U.S. Strategy and Planning, makes an agreement with the Red Army that the east-west line of the 38th parallel should be the demarcation line between Soviet and American interests. In the afterglow of victory, it was not anticipated that there would be any need to control movement between the two zones. So it seemed irrelevant that the line was totally indefensible from a military point of view. Well, you never know. Maybe one day it will be important. There is one campaign winding down this week. The Battle of the Sitang Bend in Burma limps to its finish the 7th, though the main action I talked about a few weeks ago. I said earlier that out of 18,000 Japanese, only around a third of that managed to reach the Sitang. The British and their allies had 95 killed and just over 300 wounded. You know, if you think about it by land size, the Burma campaign has been the largest Allied victory over the Japanese this war so far. And the next plan for that theater is for Operation Zipper to retake ports in Malaya as a staging ground for retaking Singapore. There is a hitch. The size and possible success of the operation was very much affected by the decision of London after victory in Europe to release soldiers with long service overseas, 3 years, 4 months. This meant stripping the forces in Mountbatten's command and led to one of the few British World War II revivals of the bitter arguments between military and civilian leaders, which had been such a prominent feature of World War I. Theater Commander Louis Mountbatten also isn't going to get all the carrier support and resources he wants. See, Zipper is supposed to take place while Operation Olympic, the invasion of Kyushu, is going on, and a lot of what he wants is going to be subordinated to that. And here are 2 notes to end the week. On the 7th, the Japanese test their first turbojet-powered aircraft, the Nakajima Kikka. They only have one prototype of this so far, and it only flies the once, a 20-minute flight. Spoiler, they will try a test flight tomorrow, but it won't successfully take off. So this is it. On the 8th, in London, Britain, France, the US, and the USSR sign an agreement establishing a military tribunal for the trials and sentencing of those who may have committed crimes against humanity. So the week ends with a Soviet invasion in Manchuria, action winding down in Burma, and 2 atomic bombs exploding over Japan. The Japanese say they will accept the declaration once stuff with the Emperor is dealt with, and the Americans seem to be figuring that out, so it's possible the Japanese will surrender soon. But 2 atomic bombs exploding over Japan. Let's get back to that. In a flash, 80,000 people die. In a flash, 40,000 more die. How many more flashes will there be? Or will the threat of a flash be enough to have supremacy? What if someone else develops flashes? Will there be a stalemate of sorts? Just as this global war that took tens of millions of lives is nearing its end, it seems to me that these 2 flashes herald the possibility of an even greater death toll. Make no mistake, from this week, we are now in uncharted waters. The war might be nearing its end, but it hasn't reached it, and it is the Time Ghost Army that continues to allow me to cover it from start to finish, and finances all of our other productions as well. You can join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. These are the newest officers in the Army, and the Army member of the week for this channel is Robert Hiller. Hey, Robert. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.